In a park still slick with the recent downpour, a young black boy struggled, his every muscle straining as he attempted to free a girl in a wheelchair from the tenacious grip of the mud. A small crowd began to form, their faces a mixture of curiosity and indifference, yet none offered a hand. Then, a luxury sedan screeched to a halt nearby, and a man, radiating wealth and authority, stormed towards them. He was the girl's father, a billionaire named David Anderson. Seeing the boy struggling with his daughter, his initial reaction was a surge of protective anger, wrongly assuming the boy was the cause of her distress. He launched into a stern scolding, his voice sharp and accusatory. However, the truth quickly dawned on him. The boy wasn't harming her. He was helping her. A wave of shame washed over him, and he stammered an apology, his anger replaced by gratitude. Little did the boy know that this single act of selfless kindness, performed in a rain-soaked park with an audience of indifferent onlookers, would irrevocably alter the course of his life. The following day, the billionaire appeared at the boy's modest doorstep, an unexpected benefactor bearing a proposal so life-changing it brought tears to the young man's eyes. But before we delve into that extraordinary encounter, let's set the scene. The rain had ceased its relentless assault 20 minutes prior, yet Brookdale Park remained a somber landscape, resembling a battlefield scarred by the elements. Puddles, vast as dinner tables, sprawled across the walking paths, reflecting the gloomy sky above. Mud, thick, dark, and unforgiving, clung stubbornly to everything it touched, a testament to the storm's recent fury. The ancient oak trees, their branches heavy and bowed, dripped with a steady rhythm, each drop a melancholic reminder of the deluge. The air hung heavy with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves, a pungent aroma that permeated every corner of the park. Leah Anderson, a petite 10-year-old with dark hair plastered to her forehead, sat motionless in her wheelchair at the edge of the main pathway. Her gaze was fixed on the muddy abyss that had ensnared her front wheels. Her small hands gripped the wheel rims with such force that her knuckles had turned bone white. "Come on," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the ambient sounds of the park. "Please." She pushed with all her might, but the wheels remained stubbornly embedded. The mud was a viscous, almost sentient force, holding her captive. It had seized her chair the moment she'd attempted to navigate around a particularly large puddle, and now it held her with the unyielding grip of quicksand. Each struggle only worsened her predicament, sinking the wheels deeper into the mire. Her arms trembled with the exertion. She pushed again, harder this time, but to no avail. Her breath grew shallow and rapid as panic began to creep up her spine, chilling her like ice water. Twisting in her seat, she desperately scanned the area behind her, seeking the familiar face of Miss Cooper, the nanny her father had hired to care for her. There she was, 30 meters away, leaning casually against the armrest of a bench, a phone pressed to her ear. She was perfectly dry beneath the park's covered pavilion, oblivious to Leah's plight. "Miss Cooper," Leah called out, her voice thin and tinged with desperation. The woman didn't even glance in her direction. "Miss Cooper, please. I need help." This time, Miss Cooper briefly flicked her eyes towards Leah. Her gaze landed on the girl for a fleeting moment, just long enough to register the situation. Then, with a dismissive shrug, she turned her back and continued her phone conversation. Leah's heart plummeted. She could clearly hear Miss Cooper's voice, carried across the empty space, casual and unconcerned. "I don't know, Janet. She's fine. She always makes everything so dramatic." Leah's hands went numb. "The kid needs to learn some independence, you know?" Miss Cooper continued, punctuating her words with a short, insensitive laugh. "Can't have someone running after her every 5 minutes. She's got to figure things out on her own." The words struck Leah with the force of a physical blow. She stared at the woman's back, silently pleading for her to turn around, to acknowledge her, to care. But Miss Cooper merely shifted her weight and continued her conversation. "Honestly, sometimes I think she does it on purpose, for attention." Leah's throat burned with suppressed tears. She turned away, blinking hard to fight back the tears that threatened to spill over. Fine, she thought she'd find help elsewhere. A woman in a pink jogging suit, earbuds firmly in place, was approaching along the path, moving at a steady pace. "Excuse me," Leia called out, her voice cracking with emotion. "I need help." The jogger glanced over. Their eyes met for a brief, fleeting moment. Then the woman averted her gaze and continued running, her ponytail swinging rhythmically behind her as she disappeared around the bend. Leia's chest tightened with a fresh wave of despair. "Please," she tried again, louder this time. But the woman didn't stop, didn't even slow down. Next, a man in a business suit appeared, a phone pressed to his ear, a briefcase clutched tightly in his hand. He was walking briskly, clearly pressed for time. "Sir," Leia called out. "Sir, please, I'm stuck." He saw her. She knew he did. His eyes flicked towards her for a fraction of a second. Then he turned his head away and quickened his pace, his voice rising as he spoke into the phone. "Yeah, I'm almost there. Traffic was a nightmare." He passed her without a word, his attention solely focused on his phone conversation. Leia felt something inside her chest begin to crack. A young couple approached next, their faces bright with laughter. The girl had her arm linked through her boyfriend's, her expression carefree. "Help!" Leia's voice was desperate now. "Please, I need help." The girl noticed her first. Her smile faltered, and she nudged her boyfriend, nodding towards the wheelchair. They both looked at Leia, then at the mud, then back at each other. The boyfriend pulled out his phone, pretending to check a message, and steered them both in the opposite direction. "We're going to be late," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. They walked away, their laughter abruptly silenced. Leia's vision blurred with tears. She tried to push the wheels again, her arms screaming in protest, but they remained firmly entrenched. The mud held her fast, like countless tiny hands pulling her down. The wind picked up, becoming cold and sharp. A sudden gust hit her face, carrying with it a spray of mud from the ground. It splattered across her cheek, her neck, her hands. She flinched, squeezing her eyes shut. When she opened them again, the world seemed smaller, darker, and infinitely more isolating. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible now. "Anyone?" The park was teeming with people, dog walkers, joggers, families with strollers. Yet she was utterly alone, stranded in a sea of indifference. Her breathing quickened, her chest felt constricted, and the sounds around her faded into a dull hum. All she could hear was the frantic pounding of her own heartbeat and the ragged rasp of her breath. She looked down at the mud relentlessly swallowing her wheels. It felt as though the world itself was dragging her under, and no one, it seemed, cared enough to reach down and pull her back up. Behind her, Miss Cooper laughed at something she heard on the phone, completely oblivious to the silent despair engulfing the young girl. Leia's hands went limp in her lap, her hope extinguished. And then, a flicker of movement. In the distance, at the far edge of the park, a figure appeared. A boy, seemingly a teenager, tall and lean, wearing a dark green work uniform with a name tag she couldn't decipher from that distance. He was walking quickly, his head down, a plastic grocery bag swinging from one hand. Malik Johnson was bone-tired. His shift at Rivermart had stretched 2 hours beyond its scheduled end, due to an employee calling in sick. The manager, desperate for assistance, had pleaded with him to stay. He'd agreed, as he always did, because his grandmother desperately needed the extra money for her medications, and the rent was due in just 3 days. Though only 15 years old, he felt 30. His feet ached relentlessly inside his worn-out sneakers. His green work uniform was damp with sweat and carried the faint, lingering odor of disinfectant and decaying produce. The plastic grocery bag in his hand, containing 2 cans of soup and a loaf of bread, felt heavier than it should. All he craved was to reach home, kick off his shoes, and collapse for a few precious minutes of rest. But then he saw her. At first, she was merely a shape in the distance, a small, indistinct figure near the pathway. However, something about the way she sat, perfectly still, her shoulders slumped forward in a posture of defeat, compelled him to slow his pace. He squinted, trying to make out the details. A wheelchair, mired in the mud. A little girl, sitting alone, her hands gripping the wheels as if her life depended on it. Malik stopped walking. His mind instantly registered everything: the mud imprisoning the wheels, the subtle trembling of her body, the stream of people passing by without offering assistance. His chest tightened with a mixture of empathy and righteous indignation. He glanced down at the grocery bag in his hand, then at his phone nestled in his pocket, and finally at his shoes, the only pair he owned that weren't falling apart. Everything was going to get soaked. He looked back at the girl. She was crying now. He could see it even from that distance. Malik dropped the bag without hesitation and began to run. His sneakers pounded against the wet pavement, sending plumes of water splashing upwards with each stride. The cold air burned in his lungs, but he didn't slow down. He cut across the grass, weaving through puddles, ignoring the shouts of a dog walker as he raced towards the stranded girl. She looked up as he approached, her eyes wide and rimmed with red. "Hey," Malik said, his voice breathless. "Hey, it's okay. I'm here." She stared at him as if she couldn't quite believe he was real, as if he were a mirage conjured from her despair. He dropped to his knees in front of the wheelchair, oblivious to the mud seeping through his uniform pants. Up close, he could see just how deeply the wheels were buried. The mud was thick, almost clay-like, and had formed a powerful suction around the rubber tires. "Okay," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Okay, let's get you out of here." He grabbed the cold, wet metal frame of the wheelchair and pulled with all his strength. Nothing. He braced his feet against the ground and pulled harder, his muscles straining, his back protesting. The chair remained stubbornly fixed. "Come on," he hissed through clenched teeth, his frustration mounting. He tried pushing instead, rocking the chair back and forth in an attempt to break the suction. The wheels shifted slightly, but only sank deeper with each movement. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. He quickly scanned the area, searching for anything that might be of use. A thick branch lay a few feet away, partially submerged in a puddle. He grabbed it and wedged it under the front wheel, using it as a makeshift lever. "Hold on," he said to the girl. "This might jolt you a little." She nodded, her hands still gripping the armrests with a desperate intensity. Malik pressed down on the branch with all his weight. The wood groaned under the pressure, and the wheel lifted an inch. Then, with a sickening crack, the branch snapped in half, sending him sprawling forward, nearly face-first into the mud. "Shit," he muttered, spitting out a mouthful of grit. "It's okay," the girl whispered, her voice so small he almost didn't hear it. "You tried. It's okay." Malik looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. She was, as he suspected, around 10 years old, soaked to the bone and shivering uncontrollably. Her face was streaked with mud and tears, but her eyes, God, her eyes held a depth of resignation that no child should ever possess, as if she were accustomed to being abandoned, left behind. Something twisted painfully in Malik's chest. "No," he said firmly, his voice resolute. "It's not okay." He yanked off his work jacket and tossed it aside without a second thought. Then he crouched down in front of her, his hands hovering tentatively near her arms. "I'm going to pick you up," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Get you out of this chair and onto dry ground. Is that okay?" She hesitated for a moment, her eyes searching his. Then, she nodded slowly. "Okay, on 3. 1. Suddenly, Malik froze. A man in a gray suit was striding purposefully towards them, his face contorted in a mask of alarm. He was middle-aged, balding, and carried a briefcase swinging from one hand like a weapon. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Malik straightened up slightly, but remained positioned protectively near the girl. "I'm helping her," he said evenly. "She's stuck. Don't touch her." The man's voice was sharp and authoritative. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes darting suspiciously between Malik and the girl. "Do you know who she is?" "Her father is David Anderson. The David Anderson. You lay one hand on her, and you'll have a lawsuit so fast." "She's scared," Malik interrupted. his voice quiet but firm, cutting through the man's bluster. The man blinked, momentarily taken aback. What? She's scared. Malik looked down at the girl, then back at the man. And I can't just stand here and watch. The girl, still trembling in her chair, looked up at Malik, her eyes filled with something akin to hope. The man in the suit opened his mouth to retort, then abruptly closed it. He glanced around nervously, as if searching for backup or witnesses. Look, kid, he said, his tone slightly softer now, but still wary. I get it, but this is a bad idea. Her father, you don't want to get involved with people like that. Trust me. I'm already involved, Malik said simply, meeting the man's gaze without flinching. The man shook his head, muttering something unintelligible under his breath. He pulled out his phone and began to walk away, glancing back over his shoulder with a mixture of concern and disapproval. Your funeral, kid, he called out, his voice laced with a mixture of warning and resignation. Malik watched him go, then turned back to the girl. A few other people had stopped now, forming a loose circle at a safe distance, watching the scene unfold with detached curiosity. Some were recording with their phones, while others whispered amongst themselves, their faces a mixture of fascination and judgment. But not helping, never helping, Malik said softly to the girl, his voice laced with disdain. Ignore them. He turned back to her. Ready? She nodded, her eyes locked on his, her trust palpable. He slid his arms carefully under her legs and back, then lifted her gently. She was lighter than he expected, her arms instinctively wrapping around his neck, holding on tight with a mixture of desperation and trust. I've got you, he murmured reassuringly. I've got you. The mud sucked at his shoes as he straightened up, the effort straining his muscles. The girl nestled against his chest, her small body trembling against his. He took one step, then another, each movement feeling as if he were wading through quicksand. His arms burned with the exertion, his legs shook with fatigue, but he didn't stop. The rain started again, light at first, just a drizzle. Then, heavier, the cold drops pelting his face and neck, soaking through his thin shirt. The world around him seemed to slow down, the sounds of the park fading into a muted hum. The rain, once a torment, now felt strangely cleansing. Water fell like shooting stars, catching the muted afternoon light. Each raindrop seemed to trace a delicate path through the air, creating a moment of surreal beauty amidst the grim reality. The girl's grip tightened around his neck. He could feel her trembling, her breath catching in her throat as she fought back tears. You're okay, he said softly, his voice a reassuring presence in the storm. We're almost there. Thank you, she whispered against his shoulder, her voice breaking with emotion. Thank you, thank you. Malik felt something crack within his own chest, a dam of pent-up emotions finally giving way. This girl, this small, fragile child who had been abandoned and ignored by everyone else, was thanking him as if he'd performed some extraordinary feat of heroism. But he hadn't. He'd simply done what any decent human being should have done. He stepped out of the clinging mud and onto the solid pavement, the relief immediate. His legs nearly buckled beneath him, but he locked his knees and kept moving forward. The small crowd watched in silence, their expressions unreadable. Some still had their phones out, recording the scene for posterity. Others simply stared, caught between a sense of guilt and morbid fascination. Malik ignored them all, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other, his gaze fixed on his destination. There was a stone bench just ahead, partially sheltered by the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree. He headed towards it, his breath coming in ragged gasps now. The girl didn't let go even when he reached the bench. Her arms remained locked around his neck, her face pressed tightly against his shoulder. For a long moment, Malik simply stood there in the rain, allowing her to cling to him, allowing her to feel safe. You're okay now, he said quietly, his voice a soothing balm. I promise. Finally, slowly, her arms loosened their grip. She pulled back just enough to look up at him, her eyes wide and filled with a mixture of tears and gratitude. You came, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You actually came. Malik carefully sat her down on the bench, then knelt in front of her so they were at eye level. Rain dripped from his hair and clothes, forming puddles at his feet, but he didn't care. Of course I did, he said, his voice gentle and reassuring. But no one else. Her voice cracked with remembered pain. They all just walked away. I know. He reached out and gently wiped a smear of mud from her cheek with his thumb, his touch surprisingly tender. But that doesn't matter now. You're safe. She nodded, her chin trembling slightly. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. This teenage boy in a mud-soaked work uniform and this little girl who had been abandoned by everyone around her, finding solace and connection in the aftermath of a storm. What's your name? She asked softly, breaking the silence. Malik, he said. Malik Johnson. I'm Leia. She tried to smile, but it came out shaky and uncertain. Leia Anderson. Nice to meet you, Leia. She looked down at her mud-covered hands, then back at the wheelchair, still stuck in the mud 20 feet away. My chair, she said quietly, her voice tinged with worry. I'll get it, Malik said immediately, his voice full of determination. Just stay here, okay? Stay dry. He stood up, his legs protesting with every movement, and turned back towards the muddy expanse. But before he could take a step, he heard a phone ring, its shrill tone cutting through the somber atmosphere. In the distance, near the covered pavilion, the woman in expensive clothes finally answered her phone. Even from that distance, Malik could see her face undergo a dramatic transformation, shifting from a state of detached annoyance to one of stark alarm in an instant. She glanced at Leia, then at Malik, then back at her phone, her eyes widening with each passing second. She spoke into the phone quickly, her voice frantic, then abruptly hung up and started walking towards them. Not running, but walking with a deliberate pace, her expensive heels clicking sharply against the wet pavement. Layla? The woman called out, her voice carefully controlled. Sweetie, are you all right? Leia tensed slightly beside Malik, her body radiating a mixture of apprehension and discomfort. Miss Cooper. The woman, Miss Cooper, reached them, her eyes sweeping over the scene with a practiced air of assessment. Malik covered in mud, Leia shivering on the bench, the wheelchair still stranded in the mud. What happened? Miss Cooper asked, her tone flat and devoid of genuine concern, as if she were reciting lines from a poorly written script. I got stuck, Leia said quietly, her voice barely audible. In the mud. I called for you, but I was on an important call. Miss Cooper interrupted smoothly, her words laced with a subtle defensiveness. She turned to Malik, her smile practiced and cold. Thank you for helping her. I can take it from here. Malik didn't move, his instincts telling him something wasn't right. Her wheelchair is still stuck. Someone needs to. I'll handle it. Miss Cooper's voice sharpened, her facade of politeness beginning to crumble. I said I'll handle it. She pulled out her phone again, her fingers flying across the screen. I'm calling for assistance. And her father. He'll want to know what happened. Something in the way she said it, in the subtle undertone of dread that crept into her voice, made Malik's stomach twist with unease. I should go, he said quietly to Leia, his gaze never leaving Miss Cooper's. Wait. Leia reached out her hand, catching his wrist in a surprisingly strong grip. Don't go yet, please. Miss Cooper's eyes narrowed, her gaze shifting from Malik to Leia with a flicker of annoyance. Leia, let the boy go. I'm sure he has somewhere to be. But Leia held on, her eyes pleading with Malik to stay. He knelt back down in front of her, his decision made. I'm not going anywhere until you're okay, he said softly, his voice full of unwavering resolve. I promise. Relief washed over Leia's face, her grip on his wrist relaxing slightly. Miss Cooper's expression darkened, but she remained silent, seemingly unwilling to escalate the situation further. She turned away, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in low, urgent tones, her words inaudible to Malik and Leia. Malik stayed right where he was, kneeling in front of Leia on that cold stone bench, his presence a silent promise of protection. The rain continued to fall, a steady, relentless reminder of the storm they had both weathered. Across town, in the sterile brightness of Brookside Medical Center, David Anderson sat in a leather chair that cost more than most people's cars. However, even the luxurious surroundings couldn't soften the impact of the news he was about to receive. "Mr. Anderson," Dr. Patricia Hoffman said, her hands folded neatly on the mahogany desk between them, her expression grave. "I need you to understand the gravity of what I'm about to tell you. Your daughter's condition is permanent." David stared at her, his face an impassive mask. The word permanent echoed in his head like a gunshot in an empty room, each syllable carrying the weight of shattered hopes. "There must be something," he said, his voice remarkably steady, despite the turmoil raging within him. Years of high-stakes boardroom negotiations had taught him how to maintain control, how to keep emotion out of his tone, even in the face of devastating news. "A surgery, a new treatment, experimental procedures. I don't care what it costs." Dr. Hoffman's expression softened with practiced sympathy. She'd clearly had this conversation countless times before, delivering the same crushing blow to other desperate parents. "I wish I could give you different news, Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice laced with genuine regret. "But the damage to her spinal cord is complete. No amount of money can alter the fundamental physiology of what happened in that accident." David's jaw tightened, a muscle tic betraying the immense pressure he was under. The accident 2 years ago. A drunk driver running a red light at 60 miles per hour. His wife, Catherine, killed instantly. Leah in a coma for 3 agonizing weeks. When she finally awoke, she couldn't feel her legs. She never would again. "There are therapies," Dr. Hoffman continued, gently steering the conversation towards a more manageable topic. "Ways to improve her quality of life, her independence." "I'm already doing that," David interrupted, his voice sharp and defensive. "Physical therapy 4 times a week. Occupational therapy, the best wheelchair money can buy. Private tutors, everything." "That's excellent, Mr. Anderson. But there's something else Leah needs. Something that money can't buy." David looked up sharply, his eyes hard and suspicious. "What?" "Connection, presence." Dr. Hoffman leaned forward slightly, her gaze direct and unwavering. "I've reviewed her psychological evaluations. She's isolated, lonely. You've provided everything for her physical care. But I provide everything," David interrupted, his voice laced with barely suppressed anger. "Everything she could possibly need. Except yourself." The words hung in the air between them, accusatory and undeniable. David stood abruptly, the chair scraping harshly against the polished floor, the sound echoing the discord within him. "I'm building a company, a legacy for her, so she never has to worry about money, about care, about—" "She's 10 years old, Mr. Anderson," Dr. Hoffman said quietly, her voice laced with empathy. "She doesn't want a legacy. She wants her father." David turned away, his hands clenched tightly at his sides, his knuckles white. Through the window he could see the city skyline, the towering buildings testaments to his success, his wealth, his power. He'd helped finance many of those developments, his name etched on half of them. He'd built an empire, but he couldn't fix his daughter. His phone buzzed insistently on the desk, interrupting his thoughts. He ignored it. "Mr. Anderson, I'm not trying to." The phone buzzed again, even more insistent than before. David grabbed it, ready to silence the intrusive device, but the caller ID made him pause. "Miss Cooper." She never called during business hours unless it was an emergency. "Excuse me," he said curtly to Dr. Hoffman. His voice clipped and professional and answered the call. "What is it, Miss Cooper?" "Mr. Anderson, there's been an incident at the park." David's blood ran cold. "Is Leah hurt?" he demanded, his voice laced with barely contained panic. "No, she's fine." But what?" Miss Cooper hesitated for a split second, a pregnant pause that only heightened David's anxiety. "She got stuck in the mud, her wheelchair. There was a boy, a teenager. He picked her up, carried her out." David's grip on the phone tightened, his knuckles turning white. A boy touched his daughter, picked her up, carried her. The thought sent a wave of possessive rage surging through him. He was helping her, I think. But Mr. Anderson, some people took videos. It might not look good. I thought you should know before it. Where are you now? He interrupted, his voice clipped and demanding. Still at the park. Brookdale, near the East Pavilion. Stay there. Don't let anyone near her. I'm on my way. He ended the call abruptly, cutting off Miss Cooper before she could offer any further explanations or excuses. Dr. Hoffman was watching him intently, her expression unreadable, her professional mask firmly in place. I have to go, David said, already moving towards the door, his mind racing, his protective instincts overriding all rational thought. Mr. Anderson. He didn't wait to hear the rest. He was already out the door and striding rapidly down the hallway, his expensive dress shoes clicking sharply against the polished floor. His driver was waiting at the curb, leaning against a black Mercedes. Brookdale Park. Fast, David barked as he climbed into the back seat, his voice leaving no room for argument. The driver nodded curtly and pulled into the heavy traffic, his movements swift and efficient. David sat rigid in the plush leather seat, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, fear, anger, protectiveness, and a gnawing sense of guilt. A stranger touching his daughter, picking her up, carrying her, the thought made his skin crawl. He'd spent the past 2 years meticulously constructing a fortress of security around Leia, employing a dedicated security staff, controlling her environment, implementing every possible measure to keep her safe, to prevent anything else from ever happening to her. And now, some random teenager had simply walked right through all of it, breaching his carefully constructed defenses. His phone buzzed again, breaking his train of thought. A text message from his assistant. Board meeting in 20 minutes. Chairman asking for you. David ignored it. Another text message. This one from his CFO, Peterson. Deal closing today. Need your signature by 5 p.m. He turned the phone face down, silencing the incessant stream of demands and distractions. The city blurred past the window, towering buildings, flashing traffic lights, countless anonymous faces going about their lives, utterly oblivious to the silent panic clawing at his chest. He pulled a photograph from his wallet, creased and worn from being handled too many times. Catherine and Leia, taken 3 years ago before the accident. They were at the beach, both laughing, Catherine's arm wrapped protectively around their daughter. Leia was standing then, running, free and whole. David's throat tightened with a surge of grief. I'm sorry, he whispered to the photograph, to his deceased wife, the words barely audible above the ambient noise of the car. I'm trying so damn hard. But it was never enough. He couldn't bring Catherine back, couldn't fix Leia's legs, couldn't take away the haunting pain in his daughter's eyes every time she looked at him and saw a stranger instead of a father. All he could do was make money, build things, control what he could control. And even that was slipping away. Sir, we're here, the driver said, his voice breaking through David's anguished reverie. David looked up, his gaze sharpening. Brookdale Park stretched out before them, still glistening from the recent rain, the puddles reflecting the somber gray sky like distorted mirrors. Where? He asked, his voice clipped and impatient. East side, near the pavilion, you said. Find them. The car rolled slowly along the park road, David's eyes scanning the pathways, the benches, searching for a familiar face, a telltale wheelchair. And then he saw her, Leia, sitting on a stone bench under the protective canopy of an ancient oak tree, soaked to the bone and covered in mud. And kneeling in front of her, still talking to her with an easy familiarity, was a teenage boy in a drab green work uniform. The boy's hands were close to Leia's arms, his face close to hers, his presence radiating a warmth and connection that David desperately craved, but could never seem to provide. Everything in David's vision went red, a blinding surge of possessive rage. Stop the car, he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. The driver slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt. David was out of the car before it had even come to a complete stop, his feet hitting the pavement with a jarring thud. He started walking, then broke into a run, his anger propelling him forward like a force of nature. Miss Cooper was standing nearby, wringing her hands nervously, her face a mask of apprehension. He ignored her completely, his focus solely on the scene unfolding before him. Phone clutched in his hand, David watched. He saw his daughter's caregiver, Miss Cooper, begin to speak, but he completely disregarded her. His focus was solely on the teenage boy who was standing beside Layla, seemingly touching her. A surge of protective anger coursed through him. "Layla!" David roared, his voice cutting through the air. Both Layla and the boy looked up, startled. The boy began to straighten up, taking a hesitant step backward, but he was still too close, still within arm's reach of her. David closed the distance between them in a matter of seconds, his face a mask of fury. "Get away from her!" David barked, his voice laced with menace. "Dad, wait!" Layla's voice was filled with desperation, but David was beyond listening. He grabbed the boy roughly by the shoulder and yanked him backward. The unexpected force caused the kid to stumble, but he managed to maintain his footing. "What did you do to her?" David's voice was a guttural roar, barely controlled. "Who the hell are you?" "Dad, stop it." Layla was now sobbing, tears streaming down her muddy face. David ignored her pleas. "Did he hurt you?" he demanded, his eyes still laser-focused on the boy, searching for any sign of injury or wrongdoing. "Did he touch you?" "He saved me," Layla screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. David froze, his anger momentarily suspended. He looked at his daughter, truly looked at her for the first time since arriving at the park. Her face was streaked with tears and mud. Her clothes were soaked through and clinging to her skin. She was trembling, whether from cold, fear, or a combination of both, he couldn't tell. But the most unsettling thing was the way she was looking at him, as if he were the threat. "He saved me," Layla repeated, her voice breaking with emotion. "I was stuck in the mud, and no one would help me. No one. And he came, and he—" Her voice dissolved into a fresh wave of sobs, her body racked with uncontrollable tremors. David's hands slowly unclenched, the tension gradually leaving his body. He looked at the boy, really looked at him now. Teenage, thin, wearing a soaked-through work uniform, his shoes caked in mud. He noticed the slight tremor in the boy's hands. No threat here, just a kid who had helped his daughter when no one else would. The realization hit David with the force of a physical blow, shame washing over him. His voice came out hoarse and broken. He turned back to Miss Cooper, who was standing several feet away, suddenly very interested in her phone, pretending not to notice the scene that had just unfolded. "What happened?" Miss Cooper opened her mouth, ready to defend herself, but Layla spoke first, her voice trembling with indignation. "I called for Miss Cooper, but she was on the phone and she didn't come. And I was stuck, and everyone just walked by." Layla's words tumbled out in a rush, fueled by anger and hurt. "And then he came. He didn't even know me, and he ruined his shoes and his uniform, and he got me out. And if he hadn't—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The sobs took over, choking off her words. David stood there, frozen in place, as the full picture assembled itself in his mind. His daughter stuck and calling for help, and everyone, including the woman he paid to protect her, had walked away. Everyone except this boy. He turned back to the teenager, who was still standing there in silence, his dark eyes steady despite the fear that David could clearly see in them. "I'm sorry," David said quietly, the words feeling foreign and unfamiliar in his mouth. How long had it been since he'd genuinely apologized to anyone? The boy didn't respond, just nodded once slightly. David knelt down in front of Layla, bringing himself to her eye level. Up close, he could see how badly she was shaking, how scared she had been, how alone. "I'm sorry," he said again, this time directing the words to his daughter. "I should have been here." "You're never here," Layla whispered, the words cutting deeper than any insult from a business rival ever could. "I know," David said, his throat feeling tight with emotion. I know. He wanted to hug her, to pull her close and promise her that everything would be okay. But there was a wall between them, built from 2 years of absence and avoidance, and he didn't know how to cross it. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He stood up and looked at the boy. What's your name? He asked. Malik, the boy said quietly. Malik Johnson. Malik, David said, extending his hand. Thank you for helping my daughter. Malik hesitated for a moment, then shook his hand. His grip was firm, despite his wet, muddy palm. You're welcome, sir. David looked back at Layla, then at the wheelchair still stuck in the mud about 20 feet away, then back at Malik again. Let me take you home, he said. Please, it's the least I can do. Malik stood there, water dripping from his hair, his uniform clinging to his skin, trying to process what had just happened. 1 minute, he'd been comforting a scared little girl. The next, a man in a $1,000 suit was offering him a ride home in what was probably an expensive car. Malik glanced at Layla, then back at her father. I appreciate it, but I live across town. It's fine. I can take the bus. David gestured toward Malik's soaked uniform. You'll freeze. I've walked in worse, Malik countered. It was true. Last winter, when the heating broke in their apartment, and his grandmother couldn't afford the repair for 2 weeks, he'd walk to school every day in below-freezing temperatures. This was nothing. But David Anderson wasn't taking no for an answer. Please, David said, and something in his voice, something raw and genuine, made Malik pause. Let me do this. You helped my daughter when no one else would. The least I can do is get you home safely. Malik looked at Layla again. She was watching him with those wide, hopeful eyes. Okay, he said finally. Thank you. David nodded, then turned to Miss Cooper, who had been standing silently to the side, her phone clutched in her hand like a shield. Get the wheelchair, David said, his voice cold now, nothing like the warmth he'd shown Malik. And then go home. We'll discuss your employment later. Miss Cooper's face went pale. Mr. Anderson, I can explain. Not now. David's tone left no room for argument. Get the wheelchair, then leave. Miss Cooper opened her mouth, closed it, then walked stiffly toward the mud where the wheelchair sat half-buried. David watched her go, his jaw tight, then turned back to Malik and Layla. Come on, he said, his voice gentler now. Let's get you both out of this rain. The inside of David Anderson's Mercedes smelled like leather and expensive cologne. Malik sat in the back seat next to Layla, acutely aware of the mud staining the pristine upholstery. He tried to sit as still as possible, to touch as little as possible, but Layla had other ideas. She'd grabbed his hand the moment they got in the car and hadn't let go. Her fingers were small and cold, gripping his like a lifeline. David sat in the front passenger seat, occasionally glancing back at them through the rearview mirror. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between gratitude and something else Malik couldn't quite identify. Guilt, maybe. Where to? The driver asked. Malik gave him the address. He saw the driver's eyebrows raise slightly. The east side was not a neighborhood people like this usually visited. But the man said nothing and pulled into traffic. For a long moment nobody spoke. The only sounds were the rain pattering against the windows and the soft hum of the engine. Then David turned in his seat to face them. Malik, he said, tell me what happened. All of it. Malik hesitated. He looked at Layla, who nodded slightly, so he told the story. How he'd seen her stuck in the mud. How he'd tried to free the wheelchair, but couldn't. How everyone had walked past without stopping. He left out the part about Miss Cooper, but Layla didn't. Miss Cooper saw me, Layla said quietly, her voice barely audible over the rain. I called for her. She looked right at me, and then she turned away. David's hands clenched into fists in his lap. What? She was on the phone, Layla continued, her voice getting smaller. She said I was being dramatic, that I needed to learn independence. The air in the car went arctic. She said that? David's voice was dangerously quiet. Layla nodded, not meeting her father's eyes. David turned to face forward again, his shoulders rigid with anger. He pulled out his phone and typed something quickly, probably a message to his lawyer or HR department. Malik didn't envy Miss Cooper. "I'm sorry," David said after a moment, his voice filled with remorse. "I trusted her to take care of you, and she—" He stopped, his jaw working. "That's unacceptable." "It's not your fault," Layla said softly. But David didn't respond. He just stared out the window at the rain-soaked city, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. Malik sat there holding Layla's hand, feeling like an intruder in a private moment. Soon, the car turned onto his street. Narrower now, the buildings older and more run down. Graffiti marked the walls. A broken street light flickered weakly in the growing dusk. The contrast to Brookdale Park couldn't have been more stark. The driver pulled up in front of Malik's apartment building, a 4-story brick structure with peeling paint and rusty fire escapes. "This is it," Malik said. He started to pull his hand free from Layla's, but she held on tighter. "Wait," she said, her eyes pleading. Can I give you something to say thank you?" "You don't need to," Malik said firmly but gently. "Please," she said, her eyes searching his. "I don't have anything with me right now, but my dad could." "I don't want anything," Malik said firmly but gently. "I'm just glad you're okay." David turned around again, studying Malik with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You said you work at River Mart?" David asked. "Yes, sir." "How old are you?" 15. David's eyes flickered with something. Surprise, maybe, or concern. "You're young to be working." Malik shrugged. "I help my grandmother with the bills. She's sick. Heart condition. Someone's got to." He stopped himself abruptly. Why was he telling this man his life story? "Anyway, thank you for the ride, Mr. Anderson." He reached for the door handle, but David spoke again. "Wait." Malik paused, his hand hovering over the door. David pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card. He held it out to Malik. "My personal number is on there," David said. "If you ever need anything, a job reference, help with your grandmother's medical bills, anything, you call me. Understand?" Malik looked at the card, then at David. The man's expression was serious, earnest even. "I appreciate it," Malik said slowly, taking the card. "But I didn't help Layla for a reward." "I know." David's voice was quiet. "That's exactly why I'm offering." Layla tugged on Malik's sleeve. "Will I see you again?" Malik looked at her, this small girl who'd been abandoned by everyone around her, who'd held on to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting beneath her. "Yeah," he said. "I think you will." A real smile spread across her face, transforming her whole appearance. Malik squeezed her hand once more, then let go and climbed out of the car. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. His uniform was still soaked, his shoes squelching with every step. He turned back to wave and saw Layla pressed against the window, her palm flat against the glass. He waved. The Mercedes pulled away, its taillights disappearing around the corner. Malik stood there for a moment, David Anderson's business card in his hand, wondering what the hell had just happened. Then he climbed the 3 flights of stairs to his apartment, each step reminding him how tired he was. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment was small, just 2 rooms and a bathroom. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners, the linoleum was cracked, but it was warm, and it smelled like the soup his grandmother always kept simmering on the stove. "Malik?" His grandmother's voice came from the bedroom. "That you, baby?" "Yeah, Gram, it's me." Ruth Johnson appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a faded bathrobe, her gray hair in rollers. She was 68 but looked older, her face lined with the kind of exhaustion that came from a lifetime of hard work and harder losses. Her eyes went wide when she saw him. "Lord have mercy, child. What happened to you?" Malik looked down at himself, covered head to toe in mud, dripping water onto the floor. "Long story," he said. Ruth shuffled forward, her hand going to his cheek. "You're freezing. Go get in the shower before you catch your death. I'll heat up some soup." "Gram, I can shower later." Her voice was stern, but her eyes were warm. Malik nodded and headed for the bathroom. As the hot water finally washed away the mud and the cold, he thought about the day, about Layla stuck in the mud, about the people who'd walked past without stopping, about her father's terrified rage turning to gratitude, about the business card in his wallet. He didn't know it yet, but his life had just changed. In a mansion across town, David Anderson sat in his study, staring at the photograph of his wife and daughter on his desk. Layla was upstairs, finally warm and dry, having dinner with the housekeeper. And David was alone with his thoughts. His daughter had been trapped, crying for help, and he hadn't been there. He was never there. He'd been so focused on building wealth, on creating security, on controlling every variable he could control, that he'd forgotten the most important thing. She didn't need his money. She needed him. David picked up his phone and scrolled to Miss Cooper's number. He hesitated for just a moment, then pressed delete. She was done. Fired. He'd have his lawyer handle the details tomorrow. Then he scrolled to a different number, his assistant. "Clear my schedule for next week," he said when she answered. "All of it, sir. But the Peterson deal. They'll wait or they won't. I don't care." His voice was firm. "I'm taking time off with my daughter." There was a pause on the other end. "Of course, Mr. Anderson. I'll make the arrangements." He hung up and looked at the photograph again. "I'm going to do better," he whispered to Catherine's image. "I promise. I'm going to do better." Upstairs, Layla sat at the dinner table, pushing food around on her plate. "Not hungry, sweetheart?" Mrs. Chun, the housekeeper, asked with concern. Layla shook her head. "I keep thinking about him." "Who?" "Malik, the boy who helped me." Layla looked up, her eyes bright. "Everyone else just walked away, Mrs. Chun." "Everyone. But he didn't. He ran toward me." Mrs. Chun smiled gently. "Sounds like a good young man." "He is." Layla's voice was certain. "And I'm going to see him again. I have to." She didn't know how yet, but she would find a way. Because for the first time in 2 years, someone had seen her. Really seen her. Not as David Anderson's disabled daughter, not as a burden, not as something to be pitied or avoided, just as a person who needed help. And he'd given it without hesitation. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The clouds began to break apart, revealing patches of dark sky and the first stars of evening. And in 3 different places across the city, 3 people went to sleep thinking about the same thing. How a single moment in the mud had changed everything. 3 days passed. Malik went back to work at Rivermart, stocking shelves and mopping floors and pretending his life was exactly the same as it had been before the rain. But it wasn't. His manager kept asking about the ruined uniform. His coworkers whispered when they thought he couldn't hear, and his grandmother kept giving him these knowing looks, like she could see something in him that he couldn't see in himself. On the 4th day, someone knocked on their apartment door. Malik was heating up leftover rice for lunch. His grandmother was napping. She'd had a bad night. Her breathing labored, her medication not quite doing what it was supposed to. He wasn't expecting anyone. He opened the door and froze. David Anderson stood in the hallway, looking completely out of place in his tailored suit and polished shoes. Behind him stood Layla in her wheelchair, her face bright with excitement. "Hi," Layla said, grinning. Malik stared, speechless. "What are you? How did you?" "I still had your address from the other day," David said, his hands thrust into his pockets. He looked uncomfortable. "I hope this isn't an intrusion. Layla has been asking about you nonstop. She wanted to thank you properly." Malik glanced down the hallway at the peeling paint and the flickering fluorescent light, at the door across the hall where old Mr. Patterson was probably listening through the wall, like he always did. This was not a place where people like David Anderson usually came. Malik said, "Come in, I guess." He stepped aside, and David carefully pushed Layla's wheelchair over the threshold. The apartment looked even smaller with them in it. Layla's eyes swept across the cramped space, the sagging couch with the blanket thrown over the torn cushion, the kitchenette with its chipped counters and ancient refrigerator, the card table they used for meals. But she didn't look disgusted or pitying, just curious. "You live here with your grandmother?" Layla asked. "Yeah," Malik said, closing the door. She's sleeping right now. She hasn't been feeling well. David's expression shifted, concern, maybe, or recognition. The heart condition you mentioned. Malik nodded. What's her prognosis? The clinical words sounded strange in this context. Malik shrugged. Doctors say she needs medication and rest. The medication's expensive. Rest is hard when you're working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. She works 2 jobs at her age? Worked. Past tense. Malik's voice tightened. She had to quit both last month. Too sick. So now it's just me. The silence that followed was heavy. David opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, a voice called from the bedroom. Malik, baby, who's at the door? Just some people, Graham. Malik called back. Go back to sleep. But Ruth Johnson was already shuffling into the room, her bathrobe tied loosely, her hair in a simple bun. She stopped when she saw the visitors, her eyes widening. Oh, she said. Oh my Graham. This is Mr. Anderson and his daughter Layla from the park. Remember, I told you about the little girl you helped? Ruth's face transformed, breaking into a warm smile. Baby girl, come here. Let me look at you. Layla glanced at her father, who nodded. She wheeled herself closer. Ruth bent down. It took effort. Malik could see the way she winced, and took Layla's hands in hers. My grandson told me what happened, Ruth said softly. About you being stuck and scared. I'm so glad he was there to help. Me too, Layla said. He saved me. He's a good boy. Always has been. Ruth squeezed Layla's hands, then straightened up with a small grunt of pain. I'm sorry for the state of things. We weren't expecting company. If I'd known. Please don't apologize, David said quickly. We're the ones who showed up unannounced. We should have called first. Well, you're here now. Ruth gestured toward the couch. Sit. Malik, get our guests some water. It's all we have. But water's perfect, David said. Malik went to the kitchen and filled 2 glasses from the tap. The water pressure was weak, and it took longer than it should have. He could feel everyone watching him. When he brought the glasses back, David and Layla had settled onto the couch. David perched on the edge, like he was afraid to relax. Layla looking around with that same curious expression. Ruth had taken the folding chair by the window, her breathing slightly labored. So, Ruth said, turning to David, what brings you to our humble home, Mr. Anderson? David cleared his throat. I wanted to thank Malik properly for what he did for my daughter, and to apologize for my behavior that day. I reacted poorly. You were scared, Malik said. I get it. That's no excuse. David's voice was firm. You helped Layla when no one else would, and I treated you like a criminal. That was wrong. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. I'd like to offer you something, David said, holding it out to Malik. A gesture of gratitude. Malik didn't take it. What is it? Financial assistance for your grandmother's medical bills and a college fund for you. Full tuition to any school you want to attend. The room went silent. Malik stared at the envelope, like it might bite him. I can't accept that, he said finally. Why not? Because I didn't help Layla for money. Malik's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. I helped her because she needed help. That's it. David's expression didn't change. I know that. That's exactly why I'm offering. It doesn't feel right. Malik. Ruth started. No, Graham. Malik turned to her, his jaw set. I'm not taking money for doing the right thing. That's not who we are. Ruth looked at him for a long moment, her eyes soft. Then she turned to David. My grandson has his pride, she said. It's one of the things I love most about him. But Mr. Anderson, may I speak frankly, please? Ruth folded her hands in her lap. Pride is important. It's what keeps us standing when everything else tries to knock us down. But there's another kind of pride. The kind that won't accept help, even when it's needed. That kind of pride. That's just stubbornness dressed up in fancy clothes. Malik's jaw tightened. Graham. Hush, baby. Let me finish. Ruth looked at David again. You're offering help because you're grateful. That's good. That's right. But Malik won't take it because he thinks accepting it makes his actions worth less. Like kindness should only exist if there's nothing in return. She turned back to Malik, her voice gentler now. But baby, refusing kindness, refusing love, that's a kind of pride, too. And it hurts everyone. It hurts me because I can't get my medicine. It hurts you because you can't go to college. And it hurts Mr. Anderson because he can't express his gratitude. She paused, her gaze settling on Layla. And it hurts that little girl because you're teaching her that helping people is only valuable if you suffer for it. The words hit Malik like a physical blow. He looked at Layla, who was watching him with those wide, hopeful eyes. Refusing kindness is just another way of being alone, Ruth said softly. And we've been alone long enough, don't you think? Malik's throat felt tight. He looked at his grandmother, at the lines on her face, the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she was struggling just to sit upright. She was right. His pride was costing them both. He turned back to David, who was still holding the envelope, patient and unmoving. Okay, Malik said quietly. But on one condition. Name it. I still work. I don't want a handout. I want to earn it. David nodded slowly. What if I offered you a job at my company after school? Minimum wage to start, but with the opportunity to learn and advance. Whatever you want to learn, finance, management, you pick. Malik hesitated. And the scholarship? That's a separate matter? It's not payment, just an investment in someone who showed more character in 5 minutes than most people show in a lifetime, David said. Malik looked at his grandmother. She nodded, her eyes shining. Okay, Malik said. Deal. He took the envelope. David extended his hand, and they shook a real handshake this time, not the tentative one from the park. A handshake that meant something. Layla was practically bouncing in her wheelchair. Does this mean we'll see you more? I guess it does, Malik said, and couldn't help smiling. Good, Layla grinned. Because I have questions, like a million questions. About what? Everything. Like, why did you stop when everyone else kept walking? Why did you stop? Malik crouched down so he was at her eye level, the same way he had in the park. Because you needed help, he said simply. That's all. Here's why anyone should ever need a reason. Leia fixed him with a long, solemn look. My mom used to say that, she whispered, the words carrying the weight of unspoken grief. She said helping people shouldn't need a reason. Silence descended, thick and heavy. David's face was a carefully constructed mask, but Malik saw the raw ache flickering beneath the surface. She sounds like she was a good person, Malik offered gently. She was, Leia affirmed, her voice barely audible. She would have liked you. I would have liked her, too. Ruth cleared her throat softly, cutting through the emotionally charged atmosphere. Well, since you're here, and since we're apparently all going to be seeing more of each other, how about I put the kettle on? It's not much, but that would be wonderful, David interjected, a hint of genuine warmth entering his voice. Thank you. Ruth began to rise, but David was instantly on his feet, a surprising display of attentiveness. Let me help you, he insisted. She looked momentarily taken aback but nodded. The kettle's in the cabinet above the stove. As David carefully navigated the cramped kitchen, Malik watched him, a silent observer of this strange, unexpected tableau. Here was a billionaire, a man accustomed to sprawling estates and impeccable service, now clad in a suit that likely cost more than everything in the apartment combined, gingerly searching for a kettle that was probably older than Leia. Yet he didn't seem uncomfortable anymore. The carefully constructed facade had crumbled, revealing something undeniably human. Your dad seems different than he did at the park, Malik murmured to Leia. He is different, Leia confirmed, her gaze fixed on her father. Since that day he's been, I don't know, more there. Like he's actually seeing me for the first time in forever. She paused, then met Malik's eyes, her expression serious. You didn't just save me from the mud, she said quietly. You saved something else, too. Something bigger. Malik, at a loss for words, simply sat down on the floor next to her wheelchair, and they waited for the tea in comfortable silence. a bond forming in the shared space. Across the room, Ruth watched them both, a knowing smile gracing her lips. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," she murmured, a quiet testament to the unexpected turns life could take. In the cramped kitchen, David filled the kettle, the sound of rushing water echoing in the small space. As he waited for it to boil, he took in his surroundings, the faded wallpaper, the hairline cracks in the ceiling, the mismatched furniture, all bearing witness to a life lived on the margins. And yet, amidst the visible signs of hardship, there was something present that his opulent mansion sorely lacked: warmth, connection, a sense of belonging that transcended material possessions. He recalled Ruth's earlier words about the isolating nature of pride, how it could become an impenetrable fortress. He realized with a jolt that he had been living in his own self-imposed prison for the past 2 years. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way out. The kettle began to whistle, its shrill cry piercing the silence. David poured the boiling water into mismatched mugs, each a unique piece salvaged from a forgotten set, and carried them back to the living room. He sat down among these strangers-turned-acquaintances, people who wanted nothing from him but his presence, and for the first time in longer than he cared to remember, he felt a profound sense of peace. Felt like coming home. They lingered there for nearly an hour, sipping tea from the mismatched mugs, engaged in conversations about seemingly insignificant things that somehow carried profound meaning. Leah inquired about Malik's school life, his favorite subjects, his aspirations for the future. He spoke with animation about his burgeoning interest in engineering, his fascination with how things worked, his desire to improve upon existing designs. Ruth regaled them with embarrassing childhood stories about Malik, eliciting groans from him and peals of laughter from Leah. David listened intently, a small, genuine smile playing on his lips, a stark contrast to the forced smiles he usually wore in public. Eventually, the conversation took a more serious turn. "Mr. Anderson?" Ruth began, gently placing her mug on the coffee table. "May I ask you something?" "Of course, and please call me David." "David." Ruth nodded as if testing the sound of it. "That day at the park. Where were you?" The question hung in the air, an unspoken accusation finally voiced. David's expression became carefully guarded once more. "I was at a doctor's appointment for Leah, discussing her condition with specialists. Miss Cooper was supposed to be watching her." "Yes." Ruth paused, her gaze unwavering as she studied him. "That must be hard, trusting someone else with your child when you can't be there yourself." "It is," David admitted, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Clearly, my trust was misplaced." "Maybe." Ruth tilted her head slightly, her eyes filled with an understanding that went beyond the surface. "Or maybe the problem wasn't who you trusted. Maybe it was that you had to trust anyone at all, because you weren't there yourself." David's jaw tightened, the muscle twitching almost imperceptibly. "I was working," he retorted, his voice tinged with defensiveness. "Building a future for her, making sure she has everything she needs. Everything but you." The words were delivered softly, yet they struck with the force of a physical blow. David opened his mouth to retort, then quickly closed it, realizing the futility of arguing with the undeniable truth. He glanced at Leah, who was suddenly engrossed in studying her hands, folded tightly in her lap. David's voice was rough, laced with a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to display. "I thought I was doing the right thing. After my wife died, after the accident, I threw myself into work because it was the only thing I could control. I couldn't fix Leah's legs, couldn't bring Catherine back, but I could make money, build security, create a world where Leah would never want for anything. Except a father," Ruth finished softly, her voice filled with compassion. David's carefully constructed facade crumbled for a fleeting moment before he quickly regained his composure. "Except a father." Leah's hands were trembling in her lap. "Dad," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't want the money. I never wanted the money." David looked at her, really looked at her, and Malik witnessed the precise moment his composure shattered completely. "I know," David said, his voice cracking with remorse. "I know that now, and I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry." He moved from the couch and knelt in front of her wheelchair, taking her hands in his, mirroring Ruth's earlier gesture of comfort. "I've been so afraid," he confessed, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Afraid that if I stopped moving, stopped working, I'd have to face what happened, that I'd have to feel it, and I didn't think I could survive that." Tears were now streaming down Leia's face, her body trembling with suppressed emotion. "But I needed you," she sobbed. "I needed my dad." "I know," David murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I know." He pulled her into his arms, and she collapsed against him, her sobs racking her small frame. Malik, feeling like an intruder on this deeply personal moment, looked away, affording them a modicum of privacy. He caught his grandmother's eye, and she subtly nodded toward the kitchen, a silent invitation to retreat. They quietly slipped away, leaving father and daughter alone to navigate their shared grief. In the cramped kitchen, Malik leaned against the counter, the linoleum cool against his back. His grandmother began refilling the kettle, the clatter of porcelain a mundane counterpoint to the raw emotion they had just witnessed. "That was heavy," Malik murmured, breaking the silence. "Truth usually is." Ruth turned to face him, her eyes filled with a wisdom gleaned from a lifetime of hardship. "That man's been running from his pain for so long." He forgot his daughter was running after him, trying to catch up. Malik fell silent for a moment, contemplating the complex dynamic between father and daughter. "Do you think he'll actually change? Or is this just temporary?" "I don't know, baby," Ruth sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "But I do know that sometimes it takes something drastic to wake us up. For him, it was almost losing his daughter. For you, it was seeing someone who needed help and choosing to give it." "I didn't really think about it," Malik admitted, shrugging self-consciously. "I just acted." "I know. That's what makes it matter." Ruth reached out and gently touched his cheek, her touch conveying a depth of affection that transcended words. "You have a good heart, Malik. Your parents would be so proud." Malik's throat tightened, the familiar pang of grief washing over him. His parents had died in a house fire when he was just 7 years old, victims of a faulty electrical wire in an old building that lacked smoke detectors. His grandmother had taken him in without hesitation, despite her own struggles, providing him with a stable home filled with unwavering love. He'd spent the last 8 years trying to repay that kindness, striving to ease her burden in any way he could. "Graham," he said, broaching the subject that had been weighing heavily on his mind. "About the money, the scholarship, are you sure?" "I'm sure." Ruth's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "You deserve this, Malik. You deserve a chance at something better than—" She gestured around the cramped kitchen, her unspoken words hanging in the air. "This is enough for me," Malik protested. "As long as I have you. But it won't always be me, baby." Ruth's eyes were filled with a profound sadness. "My heart's getting worse. The doctor told me last week, maybe a year if I'm lucky, maybe less." Malik felt as if he'd been punched in the gut, the air rushing from his lungs. "What, Graham? Why didn't you tell me? Because you'd have done something foolish, like quit school to work full-time, or refuse to take care of yourself because you were too busy taking care of me." She gripped his hands tightly, her knuckles white. "But now you have a chance, a real chance. And I won't let you throw it away because of pride. Or because of me. Graham, promise me." Her voice was fierce now, brooking no argument. "Promise me you'll take the scholarship, go to college, build a life, make something of yourself. Not for me, not for them. For you." Malik's vision blurred with unshed tears. "I promise," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Ruth pulled him into a tight embrace, and he allowed himself to be held like he was 7 years old again, scared and alone and desperately needing someone to tell him that everything would be okay, even if it wasn't entirely true. When they returned to the living room, David and Leia had separated, their faces bearing the telltale signs of shared tears. But there was something palpably different about them now, a newfound connection, a sense of understanding that had been missing for far too long. They looked like they were actually seeing each other. David stood as Ruth and Malik entered, his posture straighter, his gaze more direct. "We should go," he said, his voice laced with genuine gratitude. "We've taken up enough of your time." "Nonsense," Ruth scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "You're welcome here any time." "Thank you," David said, his sincerity palpable. "For the tea. And for the other thing." Ruth simply smiled, her eyes twinkling with a knowing glint. "Sometimes we all need someone to tell us the truth, even when it hurts." David nodded, acknowledging the unspoken truth in her words. He then turned to Malik, extending his hand. "I meant what I said about the job. Come by the office next week. We'll figure out a schedule that works around your school." "I will. Thank you, sir." Leia wheeled herself over to Malik, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure," Malik replied, crouching down to meet her gaze. "That day at the park, when everyone was walking past me, did you think about walking past, too?" Malik hesitated, momentarily tempted to fabricate a more heroic version of the truth, to paint himself as a selfless savior. But Leia deserved honesty, even if it meant revealing his own initial hesitation. For about half a second, he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I was tired, wet, and I just wanted to go home." He paused, searching for the right words to explain the internal conflict he had experienced. "And then I thought about how I'd feel if I did nothing, if I just walked away like everyone else. And I realized I couldn't live with that. So, I didn't." Leia gazed at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "I'm glad you couldn't," she finally said, her voice soft but firm. "Me too," Malik admitted, a genuine smile gracing his lips. Leia surprised him by leaning forward and embracing him in a quick, fierce hug. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with heartfelt emotion. "For everything." When she pulled back, Malik stood and helped David maneuver her wheelchair toward the door. The hallway, with its peeling paint and flickering lights, seemed even more run down in contrast to their presence. But David appeared not to notice. Or if he did, he didn't care. "See you next week," David said, firmly shaking Malik's hand, his grip conveying a sense of respect and gratitude. "See you next week." They watched as David pushed Leia's wheelchair toward the elevator, their figures silhouetted against the dim light. Just before they turned the corner, Leia looked back and waved, a genuine smile illuminating her face. Malik waved back, his heart swelling with a strange mixture of hope and apprehension. Then they were gone, and Malik closed the door, the click echoing in the small apartment. He leaned against the door, suddenly overcome with exhaustion, both physical and emotional. "That was the strangest afternoon of my life," he declared, his voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and amusement. Ruth chuckled, her laughter warm and comforting. "Get used to it, baby. Something tells me your life just got a whole lot stranger." She shuffled toward her bedroom, her movements slower than usual, then paused at the doorway, her gaze fixed on Malik. "Malik, Graham, you did good today. And at the park. You did real good." She disappeared into her room before he could respond, leaving him to grapple with the weight of her words. Malik stood there in the small apartment, the envelope from David Anderson still lying on the kitchen table, a tangible symbol of the extraordinary events that had just unfolded. A week ago, his life had been simple, predictable, albeit challenging. Now he had a scholarship, a job offer, and a burgeoning connection to people who inhabited a completely different world than his. And somehow, impossibly, it had all started because he'd chosen to step into the mud instead of walking around it. He reflected on Leia's question, whether he had considered walking past. The truth was, he almost had, his initial instinct urging him to avoid involvement, to prioritize his own comfort and convenience. But something had stopped him, some deeply ingrained sense of empathy, some nagging voice inside that whispered, "This matters. This person matters. You matter." And for the first time in a long time, Malik felt like maybe, just maybe, that voice was right. Across town, in the plush leather interior of the Mercedes, Leia sat quietly, watching the city lights blur past the tinted windows. David glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his expression etched with concern. "You okay, sweetheart?" "Yeah," she replied softly, her gaze fixed on the passing scenery. She paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "Dad." "Yes, sweetheart? Can we do something? What did you have in mind?" David asked, his tone laced with anticipation. "Can we go to the park tomorrow? Just you and me. Not Miss Cooper or anyone else. Just us." David's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. Tomorrow, his schedule was packed with commitments. 3 back-to-back meetings, a crucial conference call with international investors, and a power lunch with the mayor. All of it, in that moment, seemed utterly insignificant. "Yes," he said, his voice filled with a newfound resolve. "We can do that." Leia smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, the kind he hadn't witnessed in months. "Thanks, Dad." "Thank you," David replied quietly, his voice thick with emotion, "for giving me another chance." They drove the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, the unspoken understanding between them a palpable presence in the car. And for the first time in 2 years, David Anderson felt something he had almost forgotten existed: hope. Later that night, after Leia was sound asleep and the house was cloaked in silence, David sat alone in his study, staring at his phone. Miss Cooper had called 4 times, leaving 3 increasingly frantic voicemails. He had deliberately ignored them all, his patience finally exhausted. Finally, with a sigh of resignation, he picked up the phone and dialed his lawyer's number. "James, it's David," he said, his voice firm and decisive. "I need you to draft a termination letter, effective immediately." He provided the necessary details. Miss Cooper's full name, her specific employment terms, the details of her severance package. When he hung up, he scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for his personal assistant. "Clear my calendar for tomorrow," he instructed when she answered, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "And every Thursday afternoon for the foreseeable future." "But sir, the board meeting," his assistant protested, her voice laced with concern. "The board meeting will happen without me," David interrupted, his voice unwavering. "Or it won't. Either way, I won't be there." "May I ask why, sir?" she inquired hesitantly. "I have a prior commitment," David replied, his voice softening slightly. "With my daughter." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, a moment of stunned silence. "Then, of course, Mr. Anderson, I'll make the arrangements." He hung up and leaned back in his chair, a sense of liberation washing over him. On his desk, next to the framed photo of Catherine and Leia, sat a new image, one he had impulsively had his driver take before they left Moloch's apartment. It captured Leia and Moloch sitting side by side, both smiling genuinely, their faces reflecting a shared sense of belonging, a connection that had been forged in the unlikeliest of circumstances. David reached out and gently touched the frame, his heart aching with a mixture of grief and hope. "I'm trying, Catherine," he whispered to his late wife, his voice barely audible. "I'm finally trying." And somewhere in the vast, intangible space between grief and healing, he felt a flicker of recognition, a sense that perhaps, just perhaps, she was listening. The following Monday, Moloch stood outside Anderson Tower, craning his neck to take in the full scope of the gleaming glass structure that seemed to pierce the sky, its height a testament to ambition and success. 42 floors of steel and glass, a monument to wealth and power. David Anderson's name was etched in chrome letters above the entrance, an imposing symbol of the world he was about to enter. A wave of self-doubt washed over him. This was a mistake, he thought, his hand instinctively going to his pocket, seeking the familiar reassurance of the business card David had given him. The cardstock was thick, expensive, almost ostentatious. Even the paper felt different in this world, a world of privilege and opportunity that seemed impossibly distant from his own. He almost turned around, succumbing to the familiar pull of self-preservation. But he had made a promise, and Moloch Johnson did not break his promises. With a deep breath and a surge of newfound determination, He pushed through the revolving doors, stepping into a world that felt both alien and alluring. The lobby was a cavernous expanse of polished marble and strategically placed modern art, a carefully curated display of wealth and sophistication. In this opulent setting, his worn sneakers and thrift store khakis felt like a blatant violation, a visual affront to the unspoken dress code. A security guard, his expression impassive, sized him up with a practiced gaze, his eyes lingering on Malik's worn clothing. "Can I help you?" he inquired, his tone polite but subtly skeptical. "I'm here to see Mr. Anderson," Malik replied, trying to project an air of confidence he didn't quite feel. "He's expecting me." The guard's eyebrow arched slightly, his expression betraying a flicker of surprise. "Name? Malik Johnson." The guard tapped a few keys on his computer, his eyes scanning the screen. As he read the information displayed before him, his expression shifted, the skepticism replaced by a hint of surprise, perhaps even a grudging respect. 15th floor, he announced, gesturing toward a bank of elevators. "Take the elevator on the left. Someone will meet you." Malik nodded, offering a silent thank you, and walked toward the elevators, acutely aware of the guard's gaze still fixed on him. The elevator ride felt like ascending into another dimension, a journey from his familiar reality into a world of unimaginable luxury. The elevator was smooth, silent, and impeccably clean, the walls lined with polished mirrors that reflected his own image back at him, forcing him to confront his self-consciousness. Malik avoided looking at his reflection, acutely aware of the contrast between his humble appearance and the opulent surroundings. The doors opened on the 15th floor, revealing a sleek, modern office space bathed in soft, indirect light. A woman in a sharp, impeccably tailored suit was waiting for him, her posture radiating efficiency and authority. "Mr. Johnson?" she inquired, her voice crisp and professional. "I'm Patricia Chun, Mr. Anderson's executive assistant. Follow me, please." She led him through an open office space, a hive of activity where people typed furiously at computers, spoke in hushed tones into headsets, and moved with a sense of purpose that bordered on frenzy. No one looked up as they passed, their focus laser-locked on their respective tasks. Patricia stopped at a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the city below. She knocked once, a quick, perfunctory tap, before opening the door and ushering him inside. David Anderson stood from behind a massive desk, his presence dominating the room. He looked less imposing than he had at the park, his suit less like armor, his eyes softer, more approachable. "Malik," he said, extending his hand in greeting. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for having me, sir," Malik replied, shaking his hand, his grip firm but respectful. David gestured toward a chair, upholstered in supple leather that looked both inviting and intimidating. "Sit, please." Malik sat, the chair conforming to his body with unexpected comfort. It was ergonomic, designed for hours of uninterrupted work, and likely cost more than his family's monthly rent. David leaned against the edge of his desk, his posture more relaxed than it had been at the apartment, his gaze direct and unwavering. "I've been thinking about what we discussed," David began, his voice serious but friendly, "about the scholarship and the job. I want to make sure we're clear on the terms." "Okay," Malik replied, his throat suddenly feeling dry. "The scholarship is unconditional," David stated, his words leaving no room for interpretation. "Full tuition, room and board, books, everything. To any accredited university you choose. That stands regardless of anything else." Malik's throat tightened, his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. That's incredibly generous," he managed to stammer, struggling to find the right words to express his gratitude. "It's an investment," David countered, his eyes conveying a depth of sincerity. "An investment in someone who showed more character than most adults I know." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "But I also understand your need to earn your way," he continued, his tone softening slightly. "So, I have a proposal." He reached for a folder lying on his desk and handed it to Malik. This is a paid internship after school, 3 days a week. You'll start in our IT department, learn the systems, help with basic troubleshooting. Minimum wage to start with performance reviews every 3 months. If you prove yourself, there's room for advancement. Malik opened the folder, his hands trembling slightly. The contract inside was formally typed, filled with legal jargon and official seals, a tangible representation of the opportunity that was being presented to him. This is a real job, he exclaimed, his voice filled with disbelief. Did you think I was offering charity? David asked, a hint of amusement flickering in his eyes. Malik stopped himself, realizing the potential for misinterpretation. I don't know what I thought. David's expression softened, his features relaxing into a more compassionate expression. I know what it's like to have pride, Malik, he said, his voice resonating with empathy. To want to earn everything yourself. I respect that. But I also know what your grandmother said about refusing help being its own kind of pride. A faint smile played on his lips. She strikes me as a wise woman. David crossed his arms, his gaze unwavering. So, here's what I'm proposing. You take the scholarship because you deserve it. Not just because you helped Leia, but because you have potential and drive and intelligence. You take the job because I need someone with integrity in this company. And those people are harder to find than you'd think. He paused, his expression hardening slightly. And you let me pay for your grandmother's medical treatment because... No. The word came out sharper than Malik intended, a reflex response born of years of self-reliance. David raised an eyebrow, his expression betraying a mixture of surprise and understanding. No, Malik affirmed, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. The scholarship? Yes. The job? Yes. But my grandmother's medical bills? That's too much. Why? David pressed, his gaze unwavering. Malik struggled to articulate his feelings, the words failing to capture the complexity of his emotions. Because that crosses a line. He finally managed to say, his voice laced with a quiet intensity. That's not earning anything. That's charity. And what's wrong with charity? David countered, his tone challenging. Nothing. If you need it, Malik replied, his jaw tightening with defiance. But I can handle my grandmother's bills. I've been handling them. By working yourself to exhaustion? By sacrificing your own future? David's voice was calm, but his words carried the weight of unspoken concern. Malik's jaw tightened, his resistance hardening. It's my choice, he declared, his voice laced with a stubborn pride. David fell silent for a long moment, studying Malik with an intensity that made him feel exposed, vulnerable. Then he moved around the desk and sat down in his chair, his gaze fixed on the city skyline beyond the panoramic windows. Let me tell you something about pride, Malik, he began, his voice tinged with a melancholy that hinted at past regrets. When my wife died, people offered help therapy for Leia, support groups for me, friends who wanted to be there to carry some of the weight. And I refused all of it because I thought accepting help meant I was weak, that I couldn't handle my own problems. He looked out the window at the sprawling cityscape below, his gaze distant, lost in the memories of what had been. You know what happened? He continued, his voice barely audible. I lost 2 years with my daughter. 2 years I can never get back, because I was too proud to admit I couldn't do it all alone. Malik felt the weight of those words settle in his chest, the truth of David's experience resonating with his own fears and insecurities. Your grandmother is sick, Malik, David continued, turning back to face him, his eyes filled with a mixture of compassion and concern. And she's getting worse. You working extra hours at Riverart isn't going to change that. But proper medication, regular doctor visits, maybe even a home health aide, those things could give her more time. Better time. Time with you. I can't, Malik whispered, his voice laced with a desperate plea for understanding. You can, David countered, his voice firm but gentle. But you won't because you think accepting help diminishes what you did for Leia. Like it makes your kindness transactional, doesn't it? No, Malik protested, his voice barely audible. David's voice was firm, unwavering. What you did at the park, that was pure. It wasn't about reward or recognition. It was about seeing someone who needed help and choosing to give it. Nothing I offer you changes that. The only thing my help does is allow your grandmother to live with less pain, and allow you to live with less fear. Malik looked down at his hands, calloused from years of hard labor, scarred from a childhood of making do with less. The lines on his palms told a story of struggle and resilience, of a life lived on the margins, where every opportunity had to be fought for, earned through sheer grit and determination. My grandmother said something similar, he admitted quietly, his voice filled with a grudging acknowledgement, about refusing kindness being a kind of pride. She's right, David affirmed, his gaze unwavering. But if I accept everything you're offering, what does that make me? Someone who helped a kid and got paid for it? No, David countered, leaning forward, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. It makes you someone who had the courage to accept love when it was offered, because that's what this is, Malik. Not payment, not charity. Love. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken emotion, a bridge spanning the chasm of their vastly different experiences. My daughter talks about you constantly, David continued, his voice softening, about how you didn't hesitate, how you ran toward her when everyone else walked away. She's asked to see you 3 times already this week. You gave her something I haven't been able to give her in 2 years, hope. The belief that there are still good people in the world. David's voice roughened with emotion, the carefully constructed facade crumbling once more, revealing the vulnerability that lay beneath. So, if you want to frame this as transactional, fine. You gave my daughter hope. I'm giving your grandmother health. That's the exchange. But personally, he added, a slight smile gracing his lips, I think it's simpler than that. I think we're just 2 families helping each other the way families do. Malik felt something break inside him. Some long-held wall he'd been holding up for so long he'd forgotten it was there. The weight of his pride, the fear of vulnerability, the ingrained belief that he had to shoulder every burden alone. It all seemed to crumble under the weight of David's sincerity, the undeniable truth of his words. Okay, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Okay. He repeated the word, louder this time, as if trying to convince himself. I'll accept all of it. The scholarship, the job, the medical help. All of it. Good, David replied, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of relief and gratitude. He stood and extended his hand, his grip firm, conveying a sense of shared understanding, a bond forged in the crucible of shared pain and unexpected kindness. Then let's make it official. They shook hands, a firm grip that felt like a covenant, a promise to support each other through whatever challenges lay ahead. One condition, though, Malik added, his voice regaining some of its former steel. What's that? David inquired, his eyebrow raised in anticipation. I still work, Malik insisted, his gaze unwavering. I still earn. I'm not sitting around while you pay for everything. Wouldn't dream of it? David replied, a genuine smile spreading across his face. I need someone to teach our IT department that customer service actually matters. Think you can handle that? I can try, Malik replied, a hint of defiance in his voice. That's all I ask, David said, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Patricia knocked softly on the door and entered, carrying 2 mugs of steaming coffee. She handed one to David and one to Malik, her movements efficient and unobtrusive. Malik took a tentative sip, his eyes widening in surprise. It was good coffee, really good coffee. Not the instant stuff he made at home, but rich, aromatic, expertly brewed. A small luxury he had never allowed himself to indulge in. Patricia, can you connect Malik with Dr. Hoffman? David instructed, his voice authoritative. She's the cardiologist I mentioned. I'd like her to evaluate Mrs. Johnson as soon as possible. Of course, sir, Patricia replied, making a note on her tablet. Anything else? Yes. Add Malik to the building access list and get him an employee badge right away. Patricia nodded and left the office, closing the door softly behind her. David turned back to Malik, his expression serious but friendly. "Welcome to Anderson Enterprises," he said, extending his hand once more. "Don't make me regret this." But his smile said he already knew he wouldn't. Malik smiled back, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, erasing the lines of worry and exhaustion that had become etched on his face. "I'll try not to, sir." "And Malik," David added, his voice softening slightly, "one more thing." "Yes?" "Thank you," David said, his gaze direct and unwavering. "Thank you for teaching me that accepting help isn't weakness. It's connection." Malik nodded, his throat suddenly tight, unable to trust his voice. As he left the office, contract signed and badge ordered, Malik pulled out his phone and dialed his grandmother's number, his fingers trembling slightly. "Graham, I have good news," he announced, his voice filled with a newfound hope. And for the first time in years, he actually believed that things were going to be okay. 6 months later, everything had changed. Ruth Johnson was on new medication, her color better, her breathing easier. She could walk to the corner store without stopping 3 times to catch her breath. She smiled more, laughed more. She was living instead of just surviving. And Malik was thriving. 3 afternoons a week, he worked at Anderson Enterprises, learning the intricacies of their complex systems, troubleshooting problems, and slowly earning the respect of people who had initially dismissed him as the boss's charity case. His supervisor had submitted his first performance review with a single, emphatic note: promote him. But the biggest change of all was Riverside Academy. David had enrolled Malik in the fall semester, the same prestigious private school that Leah attended, on a full scholarship, just as promised. The commute was longer, the homework was harder, and the expectations were significantly higher than anything he had experienced before, but Malik had never been happier. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just surviving, he was building something. A future filled with opportunity, a path towards a life he had only dared to dream of. And at the center of it all was Leah. They had become inseparable, forging a deep and abiding friendship that transcended their vastly different backgrounds. Between classes, Leah and Malik became inseparable. Lunchtime, after school, it didn't matter. Wherever Leah was, Malik was close by, and the reverse was equally true. Initially, their unconventional friendships sparked whispers and stares. The scholarship kid and the billionaire's disabled daughter. It was a pairing ripe for speculation and judgment. But Leah, with her indomitable spirit, paid the naysayers no mind. Slowly, Malik adopted her unwavering attitude. The simmering tension finally boiled over on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday afternoon in late March. Malik was at his locker, swapping textbooks, when he overheard the unmistakable sound of mockery. "Well, look who it is. Saint Malik, here to save the day again." A voice dripped with sarcasm. Malik turned to see 3 senior boys lounging against the lockers across the hall. Wealthy kids, the kind whose parents' names adorned buildings and wings of the school. The speaker was Chase Whitmore, lacrosse team captain, heir to a hedge fund fortune, and the epitome of entitled arrogance. "Got a problem, Chase?" Malik asked, his voice carefully neutral, refusing to betray any hint of anger. "Problem? No problem at all," Chase sneered, pushing himself off the locker, his friends flanking him like loyal attack dogs. "Just wondering how it feels to be Anderson's pet project. Living the high life on someone else's dime." "I'm not anyone's pet project," Malik retorted, his jaw tightening. "Right? You just happened to snag a full scholarship, a plum job, and a golden ticket to the best private school in the state. All because you got a little wet helping his daughter. Talk about being in the right place at the right time." Chase's smile was ugly predatory. "Must be nice having charity handed to you, Johnson. No effort required." Malik's hands clenched into fists inside his pockets. "I work for everything I have." "Sure you do, charity case," Chase drawled, his eyes raking Malik up and down with contempt. "You know what I think? I think you saw an opportunity and you seized it. Rich girl, wheelchair, daddy with pockets deeper than the Mariana Trench. Pretty smart, actually. Manipulative, but smart. Watch your mouth, Whitmore, Malik warned, his voice hardening. Or what? You gonna run crying to Mr. Anderson and get me expelled? Chase stepped closer, invading Malik's personal space. Face it, Johnson. You don't belong here. You're just some poor kid playing dress-up in our world. And everyone knows it. Before Malik could unleash the torrent of anger building inside him, a voice sliced through the tension of the hallway. That's enough. Every head swiveled. Leia sat at the end of the hall, her face flushed crimson with fury, her hands gripping the wheels of her chair. She propelled herself forward, her eyes locked on Chase. You don't know what you're talking about, she declared, her voice shaking slightly but resonating with unwavering conviction. Chase smirked, but a flicker of unease danced in his eyes. Oh look, here comes the damsel to defend her knight in shining armor. He's not my knight, Leia shot back, her voice ringing with defiance. He's my friend, my best friend. She stopped directly in front of Chase, craning her neck to meet his gaze. And he has more integrity in his little finger than you have in your entire body. Leia, it's fine, Malik started, wanting to shield her from the impending fallout. No, it's not fine, Leia insisted, her eyes never leaving Chase's. You want to know why Malik got a scholarship? Because he's brilliant. His grades are better than yours. His work ethic is better than yours. He's better than you in every way that actually matters. Chase's smirk wavered, the arrogance momentarily faltering. And you want to know what happened that day at the park? Leia's voice rose, amplified by her righteous anger. I was stuck, scared, calling for help. And people like you, people who think their money makes them special, they walked right past me. Every single one of them. A crowd was gathering now, students stopping to listen, drawn in by the drama unfolding in the hallway. But Malik, Leia's voice cracked with emotion. He didn't know who I was, didn't know my father was rich, didn't know there'd be any reward. He just saw someone who needed help, and he gave it. No hesitation, no conditions. He ruined his only pair of work shoes, got soaked in the rain, risked getting in trouble with my father. All because it was the right thing to do. She wheeled even closer to Chase, forcing him to take a step back. So, you want to call him a charity case? Fine. But at least he knows what it means to actually help someone. To be brave, to be kind. Her eyes blazed with righteous fire. If you knew what a real hero looked like, you'd have been standing with him in that rain. But you weren't. You were probably somewhere dry and safe, not giving a damn about anyone but yourself. The hallway fell silent. Every eye fixed on Chase, whose face had turned a blotchy shade of red. His friends stared at their shoes, suddenly finding them incredibly interesting. You, Chase sputtered, his voice tight with suppressed rage. I'm not done. Leia's voice cut him off, still ringing with indignation. Malik is my friend, the best friend I've ever had. He doesn't treat me like I'm broken or fragile or something to pity. He treats me like I'm a person, like I matter. And if you or anyone else has a problem with that, then you have a problem with me, too. She swept her gaze across the gathered crowd, daring anyone to challenge her. Anyone else want to call my friend a charity case? No one spoke. Good. Leia turned her wheelchair around to face Malik, her expression softening. Come on, we have engineering class. Malik stood there, stunned by her fierce defense, his throat tight with emotion. He grabbed his backpack and followed her down the hall, acutely aware of the whispers swirling in their wake. They didn't speak until they reached the engineering lab, a converted classroom filled with workbenches, tools, and half-finished projects. The room was blessedly empty. They had 15 minutes before class started. Leia wheeled to her usual spot by the window. Malik sat on the workbench beside her, the silence stretching between them. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly, his voice thick with gratitude. Yes, I did, Malik. No, listen. She turned to face him, her eyes still bright with unshed tears. For 2 years after the accident, people treated me like I was made of glass. They whispered, stared, felt sorry for me. No one saw me. They saw the wheelchair, the disability, the tragedy. Her voice trembled, barely a whisper. But you, that day in the park, you didn't see any of that. You just saw someone who needed help, and you helped. No pity, no awkwardness, just kindness. She wiped at her eyes, trying to regain her composure. You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. You made me feel normal again, human again. So yeah, I had to defend you because you saved me first. Malik felt his own eyes burning with unshed tears. You're the bravest person I know. I'm not brave, Leia countered, a sad smile playing on her lips. I'm just tired of being invisible. She managed a watery smile. But with you, I'm not invisible. I'm just me. You were always you, Leia. People just weren't looking hard enough. Well, now they're looking. Leia laughed, the sound wet with emotion. After that speech, everyone's definitely looking. That was quite a speech. I meant every word, she said, her expression turning serious. Malik, you don't just help me walk. I mean literally, yes, when my chair gets stuck or when I need to reach something, but also... She struggled to find the right words. You help me want to keep going, to keep trying, to believe that my life can still be something amazing, even if it's not what I planned. Malik's throat was too tight to speak. Leia reached out and took his hand, just like she had in the car that first day, her small fingers gripping his. We're a team, she declared, her voice firm. Right? Malik managed, finally finding his voice. Right? Good. Because I have an idea. Her eyes lit up with mischievous excitement. Oh no. Malik groaned playfully. No, listen. She interrupted, bouncing slightly in her chair. Remember how my chair kept getting stuck in the mud that day? And how there are gravel paths and sand and snow, and all these places wheelchairs just can't go? Yeah. Malik replied cautiously, sensing the storm brewing. What if we fixed that? What if we designed a wheelchair that could handle any terrain? Mud, sand, snow, hiking trails, everything. Malik sat up straighter, his engineer's mind instantly engaging. Like an all-terrain wheelchair? Exactly. We have the engineering lab. Mr. Patterson said we could use it for independent projects. We could design it, build a prototype, test it, enter it in the State Innovation Fair. Leia was practically vibrating with excitement. Malik caught her enthusiasm like a spark igniting dry tinder. Yes, and if it works, we could patent it. Help other people who feel trapped by where their wheelchairs can't go. Malik's mind was already racing, a whirlwind of ideas and possibilities. Wheel design, suspension systems, weight distribution. We'd need better wheels. Maybe something with treads or those wheels that can expand and contract. I saw a video about adaptive robotics. They talked over each other, ideas flowing, excitement building with each shared thought. This was what Malik loved, not just the intellectual challenge of engineering, but this, the partnership, the shared vision, the way they pushed each other to think bigger, to dream bolder. We could call it Will Beyond, Leia suggested, her eyes shining. Because it goes beyond what normal wheelchairs can do. Will Beyond? Malik tested the name, turning it over in his mind. I like it. So, we're doing this? Leia asked, her voice barely above a whisper, afraid to break the spell. We're doing this, Malik affirmed, his heart soaring. Leia grinned, that brilliant, transformative smile that lit up her whole face. The classroom door opened, and other students began filtering in, their chatter filling the space. Among them was Chase Whitmore, who took one look at Leia and Malik, and quickly found a seat on the opposite side of the room, avoiding their gaze. Mr. Patterson, their engineering teacher, clapped his hands together, calling the class to order. All right, everyone. Today we're discussing independent project proposals. Who wants to go first? Without hesitation, Leia's hand shot up. Miss Anderson, please share with the class, Mr. Patterson said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Leia wheeled herself to the front of the room, Malik following close behind. They stood side by side, Leia in her chair, Malik beside her, facing their classmates. Malik and I want to build an all-terrain wheelchair, Leia announced, her voice clear and confident. One that can go anywhere, do anything, so that people like me don't have to sit on the sidelines while everyone else explores the world. She looked at Malik, her eyes filled with unwavering belief, and he nodded, offering his silent support. "We're calling it Will Beyond," Malik added, his voice ringing with conviction. "And we're going to change what's possible." Mr. Patterson was quiet for a moment, studying them both, a thoughtful expression on his face. Then, a slow smile spread across his lips. "Ambitious. I like it. Approved." The class erupted in whispers, some impressed, some skeptical, but Leia and Malik didn't care. They had a project, a purpose, a shared dream that burned brighter than any doubt or criticism. As they returned to their seats, their hands brushed in an unconscious gesture of partnership. Neither of them noticed Chase Whitmore watching them from the back row, his expression no longer mocking, but thoughtful, almost respectful. That evening, Malik sat at his grandmother's kitchen table, sketching Will designs on graph paper, the lamplight illuminating his focused expression. Ruth watched him from her chair, a cup of tea steaming in her hands, her color better than it had been in months. "You're happy?" she observed, her voice gentle. Malik looked up, startled out of his concentration. Yeah, I am." "Good," Ruth smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "You deserve to be happy, baby. After everything you've been through, everything you've done for me, you deserve to just be a kid for once." "I don't feel like a kid anymore," Malik admitted, a touch of weariness in his voice. "No, but you feel like yourself, and that's even better." Ruth reached out and squeezed his hand. Malik returned to his sketches, his pencil moving quickly across the paper, ideas taking shape under his hand. For the first time in his life, the future felt like something to look forward to, instead of something to simply survive. The Wheel Beyond project consumed the next 4 months. Malik and Leia spent every spare moment in the engineering lab, designing, building, testing, failing, and trying again, driven by their shared vision and unwavering determination. The prototype went through 7 iterations before they had something that actually worked, but it did work, exceeding all their expectations. The final design featured adaptive wheels that could switch between smooth rolling and all-terrain treads with a simple lever, enhanced suspension that absorbed shocks from even the roughest ground, and a lightweight titanium frame that provided maximum strength without adding unnecessary bulk. It was beautiful, it was functional, and it was entirely theirs. They won 3rd place at the State Innovation Fair, a testament to their hard work and ingenuity. Colleges were already reaching out, eager to recruit them. A medical equipment company had expressed serious interest in licensing the design. But the real miracle wasn't the wheelchair itself. It was what had grown between them, the unwavering bond of friendship and mutual respect, the way they had become each other's family. It was a Sunday afternoon in early September when David Anderson knocked on Ruth Johnson's apartment door, the sound echoing in the small space. Malik answered, surprised. David usually called first. "Mr. Anderson, is everything okay? Is Leia?" "Leia's fine. She's downstairs in the car with Mrs. Chin." David's expression was serious, devoid of its usual warmth. "Can I come in? I need to talk to you. Both of you." Ruth appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her brow furrowed with concern. "David, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. David stepped inside, suddenly looking uncomfortable, out of place in the cramped apartment, in a way Malik had never seen before. "I have something to ask. Something important." They sat David on the worn couch, Malik and Ruth perched on the mismatched chairs across from him, the silence heavy with unspoken tension. David leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "Malik, you turn 18 in 3 months," he began, his voice grave. "And you've been accepted to MIT. Full scholarship, early admission." Malik felt his grandmother's hand find his, squeezing tight. They'd gotten the acceptance letter last week, a moment of unbridled joy. Ruth had cried for an hour, overwhelmed with pride. "I have a proposal," David continued, his eyes fixed on Malik. "And I need you to hear me out completely before you answer." "Okay," Malik replied, his heart pounding in his chest. David took a deep breath, as if bracing himself for the impact of what he was about to say. I'd like to adopt you. The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't yet exploded, a moment frozen in time. Malik stared at David, his mind reeling. What? He managed to stammer, his voice barely audible. Legally. Formally. David clarified, his gaze unwavering. I want you to be my son, part of my family, not as charity, not as repayment, but because, David's voice roughened with emotion, because that's what you already are. Your family? Ruth whispered, her eyes filled with tears. You've been family since the day you carried my daughter out of that mud. Malik couldn't breathe, couldn't think, his mind a chaotic jumble of conflicting emotions. I know what you're thinking, David said quickly, sensing Malik's distress. That this is too much, that you already have a family. I can't. The words came out strangled, choked with emotion. I can't leave my grandmother. Baby? Ruth started, her voice gentle, but firm. I won't, Malik insisted, turning to her, his eyes burning with desperate sincerity. You took me in when I had nothing, raised me, loved me. I'm not abandoning you for. You're not abandoning anyone, Malik, Ruth said firmly, her gaze locking with his. Her eyes were wet with tears, but her voice was steady, unwavering. And this isn't about leaving, Malik. It's about expanding. What? Malik asked, confusion etched on his face. Ruth looked at David, her expression conveying a silent plea. Tell him the whole proposal. David nodded, understanding her unspoken request. I'm not asking you to leave your grandmother, Malik. I'm asking if you'd both consider moving in with us, you and Ruth, into my home as family. Malik's mind went completely blank, unable to process the enormity of the offer. My house has 8 bedrooms, David continued, his voice carefully measured, trying to calm the storm raging inside Malik. Most of them sit empty. There's a first-floor suite with a full bathroom, perfect for someone with mobility concerns. He looked at Ruth, his eyes filled with genuine compassion. No stairs, easy access to everything, and a full-time nurse on staff if you need medical support. David, I can't accept. Ruth began, shaking her head in disbelief. I'm not finished, David interrupted gently but firmly. Leia talks about Malik constantly, about how he's the brother she never had, about how she feels safe when he's around. And honestly, David's voice cracked slightly, betraying the depth of his emotions. He's been more of a father figure to her these past months than I was for 2 years. He shows up. He listens. He cares. He looked at Malik directly, his eyes filled with gratitude and admiration. You've taught me what it means to be present, to put people before profit, to see what actually matters. And I... David's composure wavered, the pain of the past resurfacing. I've been so alone since Catherine died. It's been just me and Leia rattling around in that huge house, both of us drowning in our separate grief. But with you, with your grandmother, it feels like a home again. Tears were streaming down Ruth's face now, silent tears of gratitude and overwhelming emotion. I'm not trying to replace your parents, Malik, David said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. I could never do that. And I'm not trying to buy your affection. This isn't about money or obligation. It's about choice. Choosing to be family. Because families aren't always blood. Sometimes they're the people who show up in the rain. Malik's vision blurred with tears, his heart aching with a mix of joy and disbelief. I can't. Ruth took his face in her hands, turning him to look at her, her eyes filled with love and unwavering support. Baby, listen to me, she said, her voice fierce with love. I'm dying, Graham. Don't. No, you need to hear this, she insisted, her voice trembling but resolute. Her voice was fierce with love. My heart is getting worse. Dr. Hoffman says, maybe a year, maybe 2 if I'm lucky. And the thought of leaving you alone in this world terrifies me more than dying. You're not leaving, Malik protested, his voice choked with tears. The medication is working, for now, but eventually. Ruth's thumb brushed away his tears, her touch gentle and reassuring. Eventually I won't be here. And when that happens, I need to know you're not alone. That you have people who love you, who will take care of you the way you've taken care of me. But you're my family, Malik cried, his voice breaking with anguish. You're all I have. No, baby. You have more than that now. Ruth glanced at David, her eyes conveying a silent blessing. You have a man who sees your worth. A girl who looks up to you like you hung the moon. You have a chance at something beautiful. And I won't let you throw that away because of pride, or because of me. Graham, family isn't about blood, Malik. It's about who stays, who shows up, who chooses you every single day. Ruth's voice broke, her words laced with a lifetime of wisdom and love. And David is choosing you. Leah is choosing you. So, I'm asking you, baby, please choose them back. Malik dissolved into tears, his body racked with sobs. Ruth pulled him close, holding him the way she had when he was 7 years old and afraid of everything, rocking him gently as he wept. David sat quietly, giving them space, respecting their moment of profound connection. After a long moment, Malik pulled back, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, his face streaked with tears. He looked at David, his heart overflowing with gratitude. Why? He asked, his voice raw with emotion. Why do you really want this? David's answer was immediate, without hesitation. Because you saved my daughter, not just from the mud, but from loneliness. From believing the world was nothing but people who walk away. You gave her hope and friendship and purpose. He paused, his voice catching in his throat. And because you saved me, too. From becoming so focused on building an empire that I forgot to build a life. He leaned forward, his expression open and honest, his eyes filled with vulnerability. I lost my wife. I almost lost my daughter, not to death, but to my own negligence. And then you came running through that rain, and everything changed. You reminded me what actually matters. He swallowed hard, trying to regain his composure. So yes, this started as gratitude, but it's become something more. It's become love. The word love settled into the small apartment like a benediction, a gentle blessing that filled the space with warmth and light. I love you like a son, Malik, David said simply, his voice filled with sincerity. And I'd be honored if you'd let me be your father. Silence descended, thick and heavy with unspoken emotions. Then, Ruth spoke, her voice soft and filled with love. He needs a family, David. A real one, not just money or opportunity. He needs people who will show up to his graduation, celebrate his victories, hold him when he fails. Can you do that? Yes, David affirmed, without a moment's hesitation, his eyes locking with hers. Yes, I can. Ruth looked at Malik, her gaze unwavering. Baby? Malik looked at his grandmother, this woman who'd sacrificed everything for him, who'd worked herself to exhaustion to give him a life, who was asking him now, with her dying breath, to let himself be loved. Then he looked at David, this man who'd started as a stranger and become something more, who'd given him not just opportunity, but presence, who was offering not charity, but family. Okay? Malik whispered, his voice barely audible, his heart overflowing with love and gratitude. David's eyes widened, his face breaking into a relieved smile. Okay? He repeated, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. Louder now, his voice filled with conviction, Malik replied, Yes, I'd be honored to be your son. David stood, his eyes shining with tears, and crossed the small space, pulling Malik into a fierce embrace. And for the first time since his parents died, Malik let himself be held by a father, a wave of peace washing over him. Ruth watched them, tears streaming down her face, her heart filled with a profound sense of peace. Thank you, she whispered to God, to Catherine, to whoever was listening. Thank you for sending him someone to love. An hour later, they all went downstairs together, stepping out into the warm September sunlight. Leah was waiting in the Mercedes, practically vibrating with impatience. When she saw them emerge from the building, her face lit up with a radiant smile. David opened the car door, his expression beaming. Leah, we have news, he announced, his voice filled with joy. What? What is it? Leia asked, her excitement bubbling over. David paused for dramatic effect, then delivered the news that would forever change their lives. Malik's going to be your brother. For a moment, Leia just stared, her mouth agape, her mind struggling to comprehend the magnitude of his words. Then, she screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that echoed down the street, and launched herself out of the car, throwing herself into Malik's arms. He caught her, stumbling slightly, and she wrapped her arms around his neck so tight he could barely breathe. Really? She pulled back, searching his face for confirmation, her eyes shining with disbelief. Really? 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 Malik confirmed, his own eyes filled with tears of happiness. Oh my God! Oh my God! Leia hugged him again, laughing and crying at the same time, her words tumbling over each other in her excitement. I have a brother! I have a brother! Ruth wiped her eyes, watching them with a heart overflowing with love and gratitude. David put his arm around her shoulders, his expression tender. Thank you for trusting me with him, Ruth, he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. Take care of him, Ruth replied, her voice laced with a quiet plea. After I'm gone. Promise me. I promise, David affirmed, his gaze locking with hers. And Ruth? David looked at her, his voice filled with warmth. Your family, too. For however long, we're blessed to have you. Ruth smiled through her tears, her heart overflowing with gratitude. Guess I better get used to that big fancy house of yours, she quipped, her voice trembling with emotion. Guess you better, David replied, squeezing her shoulders gently. They stood there in the fading September light, two families becoming one, bound not by blood, but by choice, by love, by a shared commitment to support and care for one another. Bound by a single moment in the rain, when one boy chose to run towards someone in need instead of away. And somehow, impossibly, that choice had saved them all. 7 years later, Malik stood at a podium in MIT's graduation hall, looking out at a sea of faces, his heart filled with a mixture of gratitude, pride, and disbelief. His cap sat slightly crooked on his head, his gown was slightly wrinkled, but his smile was genuine as he gripped the edges of the wooden stand and took a deep breath, preparing to address his graduating class. When I was 15 years old, he began, his voice resonating through the hall, I made a choice that changed my life. I was walking home from work, exhausted, soaking wet, just wanting to get out of the rain. And then I saw a little girl stuck in the mud, crying for help, while people walked past like she was invisible. He paused, his eyes searching the crowd until he found Leia, sitting in the third row. She was 21 now, still in her wheelchair, but sitting taller, stronger, her eyes bright with pride. Beside her sat David and Ruth, Ruth thinner than she'd been, moving slower but alive, defying every doctor's prediction with sheer stubbornness and love. I almost kept walking, too, Malik continued, his voice filled with emotion. For about half a second, I thought about how wet I'd get, how my shoes would be ruined, how I was already late. But then I looked at her face, this terrified kid who just needed someone to see her, and I realized something. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. The cost of walking away was higher than the cost of getting wet. The audience was silent, listening intently, captivated by his story. So I ran toward her instead of away. I stepped into the mud. I picked her up. I got soaked. And in that moment, I thought I was saving her. His voice thickened with emotion, his eyes shining with tears. But the truth is, she saved me. That girl, my sister Leia, she and her father gave me a family, an education, a future. They taught me that accepting help isn't weakness, it's connection. That family isn't always blood. It's who shows up, who stays, who chooses you. Leia was crying now, not bothering to hide it, tears streaming down her face. Ruth dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her heart overflowing with pride. David sat with his arm around Ruth's shoulders, his own eyes wet with emotion, a silent testament to the bond they shared. Together, Leia and I built something called Will Beyond, Malik continued, his voice gaining strength. An all-terrain wheelchair that's now being used by people in 37 countries. We've won awards, secured patents, started a nonprofit, but none of that matters as much as what we learned building it. That obstacles aren't endings. They're just opportunities to create something better. He gripped the podium tighter, his gaze sweeping across the graduating class. I'm graduating today with a degree in biomedical engineering. I have job offers from companies that didn't even exist when I was stocking shelves at Rivermart. I have a family who loves me. I have a future that, 7 years ago, I couldn't have even imagined. He paused, taking a deep breath, his voice filled with gratitude. And it all started because I made one choice: to help someone who needed it without asking what I'd get in return. Malik looked directly at his family, his heart overflowing with love. Sometimes saving someone else is how you save yourself. Sometimes the people we help end up helping us more than we ever help them. And sometimes, his voice broke slightly, choked with emotion. Sometimes, the family you choose becomes more real than any family you could have been born into. He took a deep breath, composing himself, and offered his final words of wisdom to his graduating class. So, to everyone graduating today, I'll say this. When you see someone stuck in the mud, literally or figuratively, don't walk past. Don't calculate the cost. Don't wait for someone else to help. Just run. Run toward them. Get wet. Get dirty. Show up. Because that single choice, that moment of deciding someone else matters more than your comfort, that's what changes everything. The applause started before he even finished speaking, building into a thunderous standing ovation that filled the hall. Malik stepped back from the podium, overwhelmed with emotion, and as he descended from the stage, the applause still ringing in his ears, a warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the spotlights. Leia was already maneuvering her wheelchair toward him, her expression radiating pride. As he reached her, she reached out, her hand finding his and pulling him down into an embrace that spoke volumes. "I'm so proud of you, Malik," she whispered fiercely, her voice thick with emotion. "We both are." David stepped forward, enveloping them both in a bear hug. Ruth, tears glistening in her eyes, reached up to cup Malik's face in her trembling hands. "Your parents would be bursting with pride, baby," she said, her voice catching. "And so am I, more than you'll ever know." They stood there, the four of them, a tapestry woven not from blood ties, but from something far stronger. Choice, loyalty, and the shared experience of navigating life's storms together. Theirs was a family forged in mud and rain, born from one boy's courageous decision to run toward compassion instead of away from responsibility. 2 weeks later, an unspoken need drew Malik and Leia back to Brookdale Park. It was their first visit since that life-altering, rain-soaked afternoon 7 years prior. The park had undergone a significant transformation. Freshly paved pathways wound through the grounds. A modern drainage system promised to keep puddles at bay, and accessibility ramps were thoughtfully integrated into every corner. Yet, despite the improvements, they found themselves drawn to the familiar, scarred earth of their old spot, the place where Leia had been hopelessly stuck, the place where everything had irrevocably changed. The area looked different now, almost smaller. It was just a patch of ground like any other, the mud long gone, replaced by neatly trimmed grass. But as they settled their Leia in her wheelchair, Malik perched on the worn stone bench beside her. A sudden commotion near the playground shattered the peaceful atmosphere. A knot of teenagers had surrounded a homeless man, who was huddled on a bench. Their laughter was sharp, their jeers cruel, their words laced with venom as they mocked his tattered clothes, his perceived smell, the shopping cart overflowing with his worldly possessions. The man remained hunched over, his head bowed in silent endurance, offering no resistance to their torment. Leia's hands clenched tightly on the armrests of her chair, her knuckles white. Without a word, her jaw set with determination, she wheeled toward the group. Malik, his protective instincts flaring, followed close behind. "Hey!" Leia's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. The teenagers, startled, turned to face her. "Leave him alone." One of the boys smirked, his eyes glinting with malice. Why should we? He's not bothering anyone. We're just having a little fun. No, Leia retorted, her voice unwavering. You're being cruel and it stops now. She wheeled closer, deliberately positioning herself between the teenagers and their vulnerable target. You know what? Years ago, I was stuck in the mud right over there, she said, gesturing with a trembling hand. Scared, crying, calling for help. And people just like you walked right past me. They saw me, really saw me, and they chose to look away to pretend I wasn't there. Her voice, though laced with emotion, remained steady and strong. She turned her gaze toward the homeless man, who had finally lifted his head. His weary eyes fixed on her with a flicker of hope. This man is stuck too. Maybe not in mud, but in circumstances you clearly don't understand, and probably couldn't even imagine. And today I see him. He matters. He's worth standing up for. The teenagers shifted uncomfortably, their bravado faltering under the weight of her words. One girl actually looked genuinely ashamed, her eyes downcast. Come on, another muttered, nudging his friend. This is stupid anyway. They dispersed, melting back into the park, leaving Leia, Malik, and the homeless man alone in the sudden silence. The man looked at Leia, his eyes filled with something akin to wonder. Thank you, miss, he rasped, his voice rough with disuse. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Leia said gently, her gaze meeting his. She reached into her bag and pulled out a business card for a local shelter, along with a small wad of cash. There's a warm meal and a bed waiting for you here if you need it. No questions asked. The man took the card with shaking hands, tears welling in his eyes. God bless you, young lady. God bless you. God bless you too, sir, Leia replied softly. As they wheeled away, Malik looked at his sister with profound respect and admiration. That was incredible, Leia. I learned from the best, little brother, Leia said simply, reaching out to take his hand. They sat together on the stone bench where Malik had first set her down 7 years ago, watching the park come alive with families, joggers, and people simply living their lives. A light rain began to fall, a gentle drizzle, clean and refreshing. Neither of them moved to leave, content in their shared presence. You know what's funny? Leia said softly, breaking the silence. What? Malik asked, turning to her. That day, when I was stuck in the mud, I honestly thought my life was over, that everything good was behind me. But it wasn't ending. It was just beginning. Malik squeezed her hand, his eyes reflecting her sentiment. Same. They sat there as the rain continued to fall, two people who had been broken and remade, who had found family in the most unexpected place. They had learned that sometimes, the deepest connections come not from shared blood, but from shared mud, from being willing to get dirty to help someone else. The rain fell softly, like stars gently descending to earth. And somewhere in the park, someone helped someone else over a puddle, a small kindness, an echo of a larger truth. That we save ourselves by saving others, that family is who we choose, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is run toward someone in the rain. Leia and Malik sat together, hands linked, watching the world go by. The circle had closed. The story was complete. And the mud that had once trapped them had become the foundation on which they had built everything that mattered. Ready to go home? Malik asked, his voice filled with warmth. Leia smiled, that brilliant, transformative smile that lit up her entire face. Yeah, let's go home. And together, they left the park where their story began, carrying with them the most important lesson of all. That sometimes, getting a little wet changes everything. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.